We are. Okay, good morning. We are on the bottom of Ayin Amud Beis 70b2, all the way at the bottom. We have been discussing a machlokes about whether or not if there's a property which is forbidden for part of Shabbos, does it become forbidden for all of Shabbos? Rav Nachman was of the opinion that even if it's forbidden for part of Shabbos, you could still make it permitted at a later point. Okay, that was the point of contention, and so we're going to discuss that a little bit further. We're also going to touch upon today a little bit practically about kinyanim on Shabbos. Let's say you want to bring a gift to someone on Shabbos. You want to bring them a bottle of wine on Shabbos. Let's say you want to bring them a book on Shabbos. You want to give someone something on Shabbos. What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? We'll touch upon it briefly. We'll try to give a little bit of practical halacha as well. So Tashma. So all the way on the bottom of Ayin Amud Beis, Tashma was brought in a brisa. Yisrael v'ger. You have a Jew and a convert. Okay, so whenever the Gemara invokes a convert in these contexts, the main focus, the main thing it wants you to think about is someone who doesn't have anyone else inheriting him or her automatically, right? Because let's say you have a convert, they don't have, let's assume it's a single convert, they don't have any family, and therefore, whereas any Jew who dies, they're going to have some relative who's going to automatically acquire, but an unmarried convert will not. Okay, so Yisrael, a Jew, v'ger shruyin b'megura achas, they both live in a granary. Okay, the fact that it's a granary is not really the point. The point is that they live in a place where they share a chatzar. They share a courtyard, happens to be a granary. Okay, that was somewhat common that people would live, sometimes, now people live on top of a store or something. So whatever, they lived in this place, which was a courtyard, and they each have their own apartments there, each small home there. Okay, umeis ger miba'od yom, and the convert dies before Shabbos begins. Okay, and they leave no one behind. Okay, where it's Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph. Afal pi she'echzik Yisrael acher b'nechasav oser. Even though another Jew, meaning like a third party over here, takes possession, he restricts the chatzar. Okay, he restricts the chatzar. Now, the implication is a little bit of a funny one. This whole brisa needs a little bit of unpacking because the implication is, if no one took possession, then it would for sure be usher. It would for sure be forbidden, which is actually not true because if no one took possession of the convert's property, then there's two people living in a courtyard. One of them died. He has no heirs. So what's the halacha? It's just him. It's like in one person. You don't need to make an eruv if it's just you. So the implication is saying, even though another Jew took possession, it's still usher, implying that for sure, if no one took possession, it'd be usher. That doesn't make sense. So we're just going to ask about that. Misha chashecha. However, if the convert died after it got dark, okay, and there was already an eruv. Okay, so meaning, let's say you had a typical case, you have the Jew and you have the convert, they're living together, and they make an eruv, and then on Shabbos, the convert dies, okay? So, afal pi shelo hichzik Yisrael acher, even though no other Jew took possession of the property, eno oser, it does not restrict. Okay, so both lines of this whole brisa needs a little bit of explaining, and that's what the Gemara is going to do now. And eventually, when we finish understanding the simple understanding of this brisa, we're then going to ask the question on Rav Nachman. So hagufa kasha. The Gemara says, okay, this whole brisa is difficult. Amras mi ba'od yom, afal pi shehechsek. Okay, it said in the first line that if the convert died while it was still day, okay, even though a Jew took possession, he restricts the chatzar. V'lo mibai kilo hechsek, which implies that for sure, if no one took possession of the property, the chatzar would be forbidden. It would be forbidden. It would be restricted. You wouldn't be allowed to carry there. Adraba, the opposite is true. Ki lo hechsek lo asar. If no one took possession, in that case, again, in the case where you have a Jew and a convert living in the same place, the convert dies on Friday afternoon, and no one acquires his property, then the halacha should be that it's permitted. Yet the implication of the brisa is not that way. So Rav Papa first attempts to say, Ema afal pi shelo hichzik. Maybe that's the point. The point is that even though no one took possession. So in other words, he tries rereading the brisa with a pretty significant amendment. And although the brisa said even though another person took possession, Rav Papa says maybe the way to read the brisa is that even if no one took possession, it's still going to be usher. And that would obviously be a very novel idea. It wouldn't be illogical now, but now we'd have to understand why. But the point is that what would come out is that even though no one took possession, it's still going to be usher. Okay, so again, what would this mean is that before Shabbos begins, the convert dies in a situation where someone else, even though no one took possession of the property, even though it's now only the Jew living there, it's still going to be prohibited, right? So the Gemara asks, okay, we haven't yet even got to understand it logically, but just textually, va'afa pisha hechsek tani. It's still the brisa says the words, even though you can't make such a significant change. Again, just going back to whenever you make these amendments, what's happening oftentimes is not that we're actually like saying, oh, grab the whiteout and a pan and start like changing things. The point is that The brisa, we assume the brisa, the way it's presented is accurate. It's just that, there is understanding that there is some like implications there that have to be now spelled out, right? No, it's not like, we assume that the Mishnayos that we have, the brisas that we have, the text we have in front of us, the text we have in the tradition is accurate. It's just that, okay, sometimes you have like, you have to read between the lines. Okay, so you could read between the lines, but you can't change the entire meaning. So what you're suggesting, our Papa, is changing the entire meaning. The Brisa said, even though he took possession. So Mara says, you're right. And this is how we're going to read the Brisa, which will now fit textually. It's not going to be as much of a jump textually, and we'll have to come back and explain a little bit logically in a moment. So Achli Kamar, this is what it means. Afal pishlo hechsik mi ba'od yom. So when the convert dies, the convert dies on Friday. So even though a Jew did not take possession while it's still day, ella mishechashecha, only after dark, kevan dahavile lahachsik mi ba'od yom, since he could have taken possession while it was still day. Okay, meaning this Jew who comes along, meaning the way to read the Brisa right now is not contrasting whether someone took possession or whether someone did not take possession, right? The way we're reading it until now was that even though a Jew took possession, as opposed to, and saying it's forbidden, implication that for sure if a Jew did not take possession, it would be forbidden, which is not a true implication, because again, if no one owns it, there'd be no prohibition. But now we're reading it, even though the Jew took possession while it's still, even though a Jew did not take possession while it's day, and here's the missing words, Ela mishechashecha, but rather the Jew came along and took possession after it was dark. So again, what's the case? The case is where you have a Jew and a convert in sharing a space, and the convert dies on Friday afternoon, and no one acquires the property until Friday night, right? So in that case, kevan dehave leila hachzik me'od yom, since the Jew could have taken possession of this property while it's still day, oser, he restricts the chatzar. Okay, so what's going on over here is that really there was a scenario. It's a courtyard where, in theory, it could have been made permitted. How would it have been made permitted? Because the convert dies at 3:00, right? Now at 3:00, announcement goes up. This person passed away. Okay, so now at 3:01, any Jew could come along and acquire the property. Okay, tactless, whatever. Is whatever. He could have acquired the property, and the fact that he did not acquire the property, and the fact that you went into Shabbos without acquiring the property, and now you're coming in on Shabbos, it's too bad. In other words, we're not going to allow you to do, the simple read over here is we're not going to allow you to do bittul, because relinquish your rights, because since you could have owned the property before and then done, taking care of a proper eruv, the fact that you did not do that and you only come along at 9 p.m. on Friday night, I'm acquiring this property, where were you? The fact that you did not do that, right? You could have and should have acquired, if you wanted to acquire this property, you should have done so before Shabbos, right? Had you done so before...
You can acquire property on Shabbos.
So it always, there's never a question of does it work. The only question is, are you allowed to? We'll come back to like should or not, but in terms of does it work, everyone agrees that kinyan on Shabbos works. In other words, if I go ahead and sell you my car on Shabbos, it's a good sale. I may also have done something usser, but it's a good sale, right? Those two things. So we'll come back to what you could and should do, which we'll touch upon in a moment soon. But the point is that in terms of the does it work, 100% it works. So again, with the Brisa, the opening line of the Brisa, the first, now that we've established an understanding of the first part of the Brisa, what it's saying is that convert dies on 3:00 on Friday. Really, if now someone comes along and acquires at 9 p.m. Okay, now we want to say, you want to do bittul. Right, the Brisa seems to be saying you can't do bittul. Why can't you do bittul? Since the guy who just acquired it should have acquired it at 3:01 or any time before Shabbos, and he didn't do so, and now you walked into Shabbos and it was already forbidden. You walked into Shabbos, you acquired it, and by acquiring it, now you have this situation where you have two people owning a courtyard. There's no eruv. We say, too bad. The fact that you did not acquire, the fact that you didn't get in on the courtyard earlier, in which case you would have been able to make an eruv. Since you started Shabbos and now it's forbidden, we're going to leave it being forbidden the rest of Shabbos. Okay? And that obviously, let's just spell it out now. That's the question of Rav Nachman. We haven't finished explaining the Brisa. Rav Nachman is the one who said that the implication sounds to be, since it's forbidden for part of Shabbos, we say forbidden for the rest of Shabbos. Okay? We'll come back and we'll focus on Rav Nachman in a moment. First, we have to explain the rest of the Brisa, because we quoted a Brisa, we still have the second part of the Brisa. So let's see. So Misha Chashecha, the second part of the Brisa says, if the convert died after it got dark, okay, and the convert already had made an eruv with the Jew, even though no other Jew took possession of the property, Okay, it does not restrict the chatzar. Okay, so here too, it's a little bit funny. The phraseology is a little off. Even though no other Jew took possession, in other words, velomi ki hechsek, and certainly when a Jew took possession, right? Again, if I say even though no one else took possession, it's still going to be permitted. If no one else takes possession, that's the best case because that means there's only one person living there. So the implication is that what? Certainly in a case where another person took possession, adrab, on the contrary, he hechsek aser. If a Jew took possession, that would be problematic. That would actually create an isser because now you have two people living in the courtyard. So Rav Papa tries making the same change. Ema afapisha hechsek. Read it. Even though he took possession of the property, he does not restrict the chatzar. Okay, but Gemara says, well, again, the Bryce that we have the same question. You can't change words like yes to no is not an appropriate change. You could change, like maybe there's a phrase missing, but to change from yes, to no, that doesn't work. So this is what the Bryce means. Even though another Jew, a third party, takes possession of the convert's property after dark. Again, the safest case, the convert dies at 9 p.m. on Friday night. And now everyone's getting, and we're like, oh, Connor, this person died. And someone comes in and now at 9:30 acquires the property, even though it's acquired after Shabbos began, since he could not have taken possession while it was still day. Why couldn't he have taken possession while it was still day? The guy was alive, right? Therefore, this new person's taking possession, doesn't cause a prohibition on Shabbos. Okay, fine. So now we've understood how to read the Brisa. Ketani mihas. Now the Gemara gets back to this question. Then nonetheless, we instead in the Mishnah, Reisha oser. In the first case, it said that when a person takes the possession of the convert's property, in the case where the convert died before Shabbos, and then someone takes possession on Shabbos, we said that it's going to be aser, amai oser nevatel. Why can't the person relinquish his rights? This is a question of Nachman. Nachman is the one who said that even though it might be forbidden in the beginning of Shabbos, you are allowed to relinquish your rights on Shabbos. Why doesn't he say that over here? Why does the Brisa say that it's aser when Shabbos begins, or it's aser when the person acquires the piece of property, and then seemingly we're saying that since it was aser when the person acquired this property, therefore we say you can't do any relinquishing. That's a question of Nachman. Nachman said, even though it's aser, I'm always able to relinquishing. So Gemara says, we saw this answer earlier. My oser, what does it mean? Oser diktani ad shiavatel. It means until he relinquishes his rights. It doesn't mean it's always forbidden. What the Brisa was saying, and the way we read it according to Nachman, is as follows. Convert dies at 3. Jew acquires Eruvin, whatever, this other neighbor, this person from another courtyard, goes in and acquires the property at 9 o'clock. It is now forbidden. But if the person goes ahead and does bitzel rishus, then it works. Right? So there's nothing in this Brisa which is clearly contrary to Rav Nachman. All it says is that it's forbidden. But the one who argues with Nachman, who was, I remember now, the one who argues with Nachman, which was, I don't remember. 1 second. Rava. There we go. Rava is the one who would say that no, it's forbidden all the way through. That once it was aser, it's going. Rava is the one who says that typically it's going to be once it's aser, it's going to be aser all the way through. You can't do anything. And Rav Nachman read it. No, it's aser until the person is relinquishing. But there's nothing in the Brisa which contradicts that reading, and therefore Rav Nachman's sitting pretty. Okay, now we have another answer to some of the questions that we had earlier. Rav Yochanan wants to suggest a whole different reason. Rav Yochanan Amar, Masnayaisa Mani, who is the author of the two Brisas which said aser? Now the way Rav Nachman answered both those Brisas says it's forbidden until. In other words, just add the word until. Not that it's forbidden always throughout Shabbos, it's forbidden until relinquishing takes place. But he says there's an easier answer. Masniyas Amani, who is the author of the Brisa? It's Beishamahi. It's Beishamahi to Amri and Bitzur Rosh Hashanah. Remember we had a machlokas in our Mishnah. Are you even allowed to do relinquishing of rights on Shabbos? Everyone agrees Bitzur Rosh Hashanah works. The question is, when does it work? Beisil said, even on Shabbos you could do Bitzur Rosh Hashanah. Beishamai says Bitzur Rosh Hashanah is only going to work before Shabbos begins. Now, according to Beis Shammai, it's much more limited. In other words, what's happening when you do bittul rishus is, typically you want to collect an eruv, but let's say, a guy comes 2 minutes before Shabbos, they didn't go ahead and contribute to the eruv, so we say, bittul rishus, before Shabbos, Beis Shammai would say it works. Once Shabbos begins, it doesn't work. Now we can read we can answer these prices by saying, why? Because it's not, right? Because basically saying that those cases which say it's forbidden is because both those cases it was forbidden on Shabbos, and therefore, you can't go ahead, the convert, the person comes to the courtyard on Shabbos evening, on Friday evening, Okay, he can't go ahead and do bittul because according to Beis Shammai, you can't do bittul on Shabbos, and that would be the way to answer this price. So Beis Shammai he damri and bittul rishus b'Shabbos. It's Beis Shammai says relinquishing of rights does not work on Shabbos. It's not. We learned in our Mishnah. May masay nos rishus. When are you able to cede your rights? Beis Shammai omer mod yom. Beis Shammai says while it's still day. Beis Hillel omer mishtach shach. Beis Hillel says once it gets dark, you could still do so. Okay, now we go back to once we mentioned Beis Shammai Hillel and was also mentioned in our Mishnah, we want to understand what are they arguing about as to why you are allowed or not allowed to do bittul rishus on Shabbos. So Amar Ula, my time we're at 71a2. My time at Beis Hillel. What's the reason of Beis Hillel says that you're allowed to relinquish rights after Shabbos starts? Nase ka'omer klach etzel yafos. It's like a case where a person says you should have taken from the better ones. What in the world are we talking about? We're talking about as follows. We're talking about a case where let's say I have a farm and I have fields or whatever, and I have produce which I have gathered, okay? And then one day you come to me and you're like, oh, by the way, I took truma for you. I took truma for you, which is my obligation. I have to take truma. And so I had no idea that you were taking truma from me. But then I go ahead and I say, oh, where did you take truma from? You took it from here. You should have really taken it from these better ones. It would have been nicer. So when I'm saying that, although I'm saying you should have taken nicer ones, the fact that I'm not like punching you in the face and not like yelling at you, what am I applying? You did good. You did good. You could have done better, but you did good. Right? There's like sounds like I don't know some whatever. Fine. It sounds like some overbearing parents. Like you got an A minus. Okay, fine, not bad. The point is, but ultimately, I'm saying like I acknowledge what you did. And it makes sense. It's okay. It's okay, right? So what's happening over here is that now how does that work? To be mafresh truma, to separate truma, you need to have das. You need to have you need to be thinking about it. You need to be like cognizant of it. So there's this concept called brera. There's a concept called brera, which is like retroactivity, which basically means that although I wasn't aware at all of the fact that you went to my field and started separating truma from me, but my knowledge now retroactively is going to be relevant back then. Right? So basically, there's this notion. So klach etzel yofi is just like a catchphrase to say there is a concept called brera, which means retroactively, even though I wasn't cognizant then, retroactively, it's as if I was involved. It's as if I gave you permission back then. Okay, that's the concept. So Beis Hillel says, meaning the Gemara wants to say that the reason that Beis Hillel says you're allowed to relinquish after the beginning of Shabbos is he's saying, really, you can't do relinquishing on Shabbos. It's just that when I relinquish on Shabbos, it shows that really I was open to relinquishing before Shabbos. Right? So it's retroactively working to an earlier time. That's the idea. However, the Gemara rejects this. Amar Abaye, the problem is we just had a brisa. Meis nachri b'Shabbos. Right? In the case where the non-Jew, the non-Jew dies on Shabbos, right? And we say that the Jews in that case, let's say you had a case where there's 3 people in a courtyard, 2 Jews and one.
Non-Jews not counted.
Yeah, we're just using it as a question. Where we have 2 Jews and 1 non-Jew, and the non-Jew dies. So we say in that case where they didn't make an eruv, the one Jew is able to relinquish his rights to the other. Now, retroactivity only works if all the pieces are there. Just the only thing that's missing was like my statement or my involvement. But in that case, when the non-Jew dies on Shabbos, you can't say retroactively I was relinquishing rights before Shabbos. If I went ahead and relinquished rights to my neighbor before Shabbos while the non-Jew is alive, it's meaningless. So and yet Beis Hillel says that case works. So you can't tell me it's retroactive to before Shabbos when I was able. That's not true, because we have a very clear scenario where Beis Hillel says I could still relinquish rights, and retroactivity wouldn't work because the non-Jew would still be alive before Shabbos. And then, so clearly that's not what it's at play. Ella hachabak milki. This is what they're arguing about. The Beis Shammai says bittul rishus mikna rishusa. He holds that when I relinquish my rights, I'm transferring my rights to the recipient. To transfer rights on Shabbos, make a kinyan on Shabbos, is prohibited. So Beis Shammai says, since we're all living in this courtyard, and I forgot to do an eruv, that was the case all until right. I forgot to do the eruv, so I go ahead and I give you my rights on Shabbos. That's a kinyan. You can't make a kinyan on Shabbos, and that's why Beis Shammai says it is aser. Ubeis Hillel savri istaluke rishusa ba'almahi. I'm not actually giving you anything. I'm just removing. It's like I'm being mafkir my own place in here. I'm taking myself out of here, right? Vistaluke rishusa b'Shabbos shabartami. Abandoning my rights on Shabbos is allowed. Okay, so let's talk practically a little bit about this. You're not allowed to make kinyan. You can't do sales on Shabbos, right? So there is some discussion. It's not agreed upon by all. I want to point out that really typically you should not be able to go ahead and make a kinyan, any kinyan on Shabbos, because it's too similar to business, and we don't want to do business. Why don't we do business? Because you might come to writing. Business itself is rabbinic, but whatever. That's the decree. So because of that, we don't want to do any form of kinyanim. So how or are you allowed to give gifts on Shabbos? Some say you cannot. Some say you absolutely cannot give a gift on Shabbos. The only way to give a gift, even if you bring a bottle of wine or a box of chocolates to your host, the only way to do so is to acquire it on their behalf before Shabbos. To actually go ahead and give it to someone else to acquire on behalf of the host before Shabbos, that's the only way to do so. There is what to rely upon, where some are of the view, the Mishnah Brura is of the view, and again, not everyone agrees with this, but it certainly seems like many rely on this, and that is that if it is something that's going to be used for Shabbos, or could be used for Shabbos, a bottle of wine, they don't have to drink the wine, they don't have to eat the chocolates, but it's something that could be acquired for Shabbos, that used for Shabbos, then it would be allowed. But if you're just going to go ahead and say like, oh, I'm just going to give you this book, okay, am I going to use the book on Shabbos? A little trickier, right? I mean, if it's something which is like clearly for like the Shabbos meal, clearly for Shabbos, there's what to rely upon. Not everyone agrees. Also, it comes out of this Gemara, but there's what to rely upon. If you didn't, so if you're able to do so, when we give gifts to the bar mitzvah boy or girl, bar mitzvah girl, then we typically will give it to someone to acquire on their behalf before Shabbos for that reason. Because again, to give this book, which they're not reading on Shabbos, hopefully they're reading in the next 20 years of their lifetime. Then you can't say like, oh, I'm doing something for Shabbos. It's not. It's hard. The other thing is hefker. Are you allowed to be mafkir something on Shabbos? So the Gemara seems to be saying over here that everyone agree. That's also not so clear. There are other Gemaras who seem to contradict this. Where this does play a unique role is that if you own an item, you have to go ahead and be tovel the item, right? Let's say you didn't tovel the item before Shabbos. So what you could do, this came up during COVID when people couldn't go to the mikvah. So what do people do? We went ahead. If you remember, we got on Zoom calls and you were mafkir. So you basically relinquished ownership in front of 3 people or 2 people, and then basically said it's no longer mine. So that, according to some, even though the Gemara over here seems to say it's okay, according to some, and that would work. That would work. Let's say you don't, you need this dish on Shabbos. You forgot to bring it to the mikvah. No problem. Go ideally get 3 neighbors, and go ahead and say I'm mafkir, and that's your basting. Get a basting. They could be relatives. They could be men. They could be relatives. You say I'm being mafkir. They hear you say I'm relinquishing ownership, and then you could go ahead and use it because it's not owned by anyone. Not everyone agrees to that, but in a case of need, you would be able to do so. And again, the Gemara seems to be saying over here, everyone agreed about hefker. Let's go a little bit further because we really should turn the page. Okay. Let's see. So, until then we've been talking about chatzeros, courtyards. You have a courtyard, you have a bunch of houses in a courtyard. But let's say you have a bunch of courtyards opening up into a street. So then you also have, if you want to carry in that street, which is not surrounded, but you want to carry in, these streets, the mavois, and let's say you have courtyards going to the mavoi. So you have a bunch of courtyards, not this case exactly. Let's say you have from different sides, you have houses going to the mavoi, you want to carry in that mavoi, then you have something called shituf mavos. You have this connection, usually that's made with wine. It doesn't have to be, but usually it's made with wine. So let's say you have a case about Baisha, shituf shchena. You have a homeowner who is already a partner with his neighbors, lezebiyayin. They already share wine. In other words, they already share wine, and one of them is holding on to the wine for all of them. Not because of this halachic thing of shituf mavos. He happens to have, they invested together in some winery. So in Shrichel Aaron, they don't have to do an extra Eruv. Lezebe yayin, lezebe shemen. If let's say they're partners, one of them with wine and one of them with oil, Shrichel Aaron, even though they're already partners for something, since it's not all the same thing, it's wine and oil, the Tanna Kama says it will not work. If they have any partnership already, whether it's wine and oil, wine, they're able to make an Eruv. Okay, let's go a tiny further. Rav says that in the Mishnah where it says that they're able to make shituf, and if they all have partnership with wine, that's only if if they're all placed in one container. Amarava daikanami. It could be deduced from Mishnah. Diktani says in Mishnah, if one has wine, one has oil, they have to go ahead and make an Eruv. If you want to say the first case that it's all in one container of Sefer Shnei Kalim, and the second case is when it's 2 separate utensils. Shapir, it makes sense. If you want to say that the first case with the wine, it's in 2 utensils, but Sefer Shnei Kalim and the end, it's 2 utensils. Who cares if their partnership is about wine? Who cares if the partnership is with oil? Wine and oil. Abai says no. There's no proof in the Mishnah. Maybe really in the Mishnah the wine is being kept in 2 containers, both in the first case and the second case. Yain v'yain royal arev. Wine and wine are fit to be combined. Yain shemen in royal arev. Wine and oil are not fit to be combined. So basically, there's no proof to Rava's point. But nonetheless, Rava holds that when you have this shared ownership, it has to already be in 1 utensil. Otherwise, it would not be a good shared ownership. We're going to analyze this mission a little bit further, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.